Hey everybody, it's Tiffany from Quilter's Workshop, and today we're going to be doing a video on machine binding. As you may know, this video is supposed to be for the tutorial on how to make this little striped baby quilt, and I wasn't going to include the binding in that video because a lot of people might already know how to do that, but I thought I would make it a separate video for those of you that wanted to actually look it up. So the first thing that you're going to do if you're doing the hand binding like I'm going to be doing is cut 2.5-inch strips off of a bolt of fabric, and those are obviously going to be approximately like 41 or 42 inches in length. So based on the perimeter of your quilt, you'll need to calculate how many strips that you need to cut to go all the way around. Math is fun, everyone. So yeah, you're going to cut 2.5-inch strips. Once you're done cutting the 2.5-inch strips, you're going to cut the selvages off of the ends of each strip, and you're going to join all of the strips together with a lovely 1/4-inch seam. Don't forget to back stitch at the beginning and the end. Once they're all connected in a giant strip like I have right here, you're going to take this over to your ironing board and iron it in half. My fabric doesn't really have a right or a wrong side, but when it's folded you want to see the nice side of the fabric, so the underside of your fabric will be pressed inside together like that, so that your seams are hidden, right? So that this is just no raw edges will be hanging out basically. So then once you have that done, I always recommend to start in the middle of a side. So I've actually started already. I started over there. So you're going to start somewhere in the middle of a side, and you're going to leave yourself a little tail. You're going to line up the raw edges of the binding with the raw edges of your quilt, so the fold that you have is pointing towards the inside of the quilt into the middle of the quilt, and you're going to just sew on the edge of your foot all the way around. Then I will show you what to do when we get to a corner here. Alright, so then once you've come down to the corner, actually this isn't even the corner I was supposed to do. I actually forgot to do the last corner and then had to come across another side to get to here because I forgot to stop and film me doing the corner because it's like 6:30 a.m. right now, and yep, stuff just happens, doesn't it, Amy? Yep, just happens. Okay, so you're going to keep that 1/4-inch seam nice and straight, as straight as you can. When you get down to this corner, you're going to stop about 1/4 inch away from this side of the quilt. Like you can feel it through the binding strip there. So you're going to leave about 1/4 inch from the actual edge of the quilt. Do a little back stitch in there. Here's how you'll know that you've kept this distance proper. Like if you've come too far and it's smaller than 1/4 inch, or if you've stopped too far away and it's bigger than 1/4 inch, this next step won't work out. So what you're going to be doing is just flip this strip up so that you're creating a little 45-degree line there. And what will happen, oh, I need something to put this on. Sorry everyone. Okay, that's better. So basically when you bring this strip up to create that 45-degree line, if your binding edge, like this edge here, does not create a smooth line with your quilt, like let's say you turned it in and maybe your quilt is sticking out and it goes like straight down and then it jogs out, that means that that distance in the corner there is not perfectly 1/4 inch. So you want them to be nice and even when you have your 45. So see how this bit is nice and flush with each other. So once you've got that, you're going to keep this thumb here, bring the strip over your thumb so that the top fold that I've just created right here, this little top fold, is even with my quilt. So you can see the edge of my quilt right there, and then you're going to just scoot your thumb out of the way like that. Sometimes if you get it a little messed up, you can fix it, because you want all of your edges here to still be even, right? And you want all of your edges here to be even. And then because of the first initial thing that I told you about, you want these to be even. So that's really important. So when you do that little 45, the very first little flip, you want to make sure that those are flush together, because if they're not, when you finish doing this little foldy dippity-doo situation, Sorry, I need some better words to describe what happens at the corner of a binding, but regardless, when you bring this back down and you're going to now carry on sewing here, you want your binding to still be able to reach the edge of your quilt. And if it's thrown off, then that whole side is going to be thrown off, and that's no good. So basically, when you put this in your sewing machine now, you're more than welcome to stick a pin in it, like if you wanted to pin right here so it holds it together. I usually just like to hold it with my thumbs, but when you start, you're going to start 1/4 of an inch from the top. So you'll start right here with the edge of your pressure foot still on the edge of your quilt, so it's 1/4 of an inch as well. And what that's going to do is, like on the back, oh, I haven't cut my thread there, but on the back, we stopped 1/4 of an inch from the edge of our quilt, and now we're going to start 1/4 of an inch in so that we meet that spot, and then you're going to just start traveling down. So it's going to look like you pivoted at a corner if you were to look at it from the back side. So hopefully that makes sense. So just start 1/4 of an inch from the top, and then you're going to carry on down this side. And then obviously when you get to the corner again, you're going to repeat the same process. Now I'm on my last side, so after I've done this part, I'm going to show you what to do when you get back to the beginning of where you started. Okay, so when I was coming down this side here, as you can see, this is where I began sewing, right down there. And when I began, I left a little tail. And when I've just started to approach that, I've left about 4 inches, I'd say, of space, and I've done a little back stitch, and now I have a little bit of leftover on my strip, and then obviously I have my tail from the beginning. So what we need to do now is we need to join the ends of these so that they look like all of the other joins that we've made. Now this part is always a little difficult for me to explain because I just sort of eyeball it, and I just sort of know, and I think after a while, once you've done so many, it will just become second nature to you. But basically, so I've trimmed the excess here. I've given myself, you know, much more than I had on the first side, but you don't need all that extra length if you have, you know, 10 or 12 inches hanging out. So what you're going to do is open up these strips like that. Okay, so that your little fold line is there. You're going to open up both of them, and essentially you're going to be putting them, remember this would be the right side of it, so you would be putting them with the right sides together. And what I do is I sort of, in the space that I have left that I haven't sewn, I sort of shuffle my hand down so that I can imagine where the seam needs to be. Like, okay, so, you know, there's some slack in the quilt here, so that would need to be flattened out. And then if you just sort of hold it, it's like if I sewed right there, my strips would fit this little open area. So what you can do is you can use a pin if you want, like once you've pinched a good spot and you know, okay, like I have to sew across that, then what you can do is bring it to your sewing machine, open up these strips the best you can away from your quilt, right? So you'll be picking it up like this, and you're going to backstitch and just sew a nice little seam right across there. And then what I always suggest is before you cut it, like before you cut off this extra bit here, double check to make sure that it will fit in there. This is my pooch. She likes to sit and do this when she's tired of me sewing and she wants me to come cuddle her. Or she's probably wondering when she's going to get her morning walk. She's so sweet. Say hi, my love. Hello. Alright, so back to this binding. I've sewn that together. Okay, so I've got my excess bits. I opened up the strips. I laid them against my quilt. I pinched it. I lifted it up and I put it in my machine and I sewed across here. So now what I can do is I can leave about 1/4 of an inch of what would have been the seam allowance and trim off these little extra pieces. So I'm going to do that now. So once you trim off your extra fabric there, you're just going to fold this with the seams touching so that the strip just falls back into place how it did before. You can give that seam a little press there because if you remember when we joined all the strips together, we did iron as we went along. So you're just going to want to do that, and then it's just going to fit perfectly in that space. And then what you'll do, now that these edges are even with the edges of the quilt, you're just going to start where you left your opening there and do a little back stitch and just carry on straight across and do another little back stitch so that the rest of this is just attached the same way that the rest of the quilt is. Okay, so now that you've got that all on, we're going to do the hand binding part. So I've started just a small portion here, but basically we were looking at it before from the top, right? So we were sewing this binding on with the folded edge pointing into the center of our quilt. And now we're going to be holding it so that the back of our quilt is facing us, and you're going to bring the binding up and over the seam, just like that. Now, if you have a hard time getting the binding over it, that means that this seam is not 1/4 of an inch and it's a little bit too thick, in which case, I mean, taking it off would be a problem. So you could maybe just trim it down so that you have, mine's usually like the size of my pinky. That's usually about 1/4 of an inch, a little bit bigger, 3/8 maybe. Anyway, so you're going to fold the binding up and over that seam so it's all covered. And basically the amount of binding that you see here should be equal to the amount on the front. So if it's not, again, it's because your seam on the inside is too large and it's preventing it from being even, half and half. So you're going to grab a needle and some thread that is the same color or as close as you can to the color of your binding, okay? Don't do the color of the back of the quilt, it has to be the color of the binding. And what we're going to do is just a blind stitch. So I've got a stitch in there already, so I'll pull that through. I use quite a long piece. I know some people don't like using such a long piece because it can get tangled, but usually if I'm focused on it, I can prevent that from happening. So hopefully you can see, but basically the thread is coming up from the very edge right here of the binding, okay? It's not coming up through the backing fabric, it's coming up through the binding fabric. So what you're going to do to make another stitch is we're going to go down right beside it, but we're going down on the backing fabric. So I'm going down on the blue, right exactly where it is. I'm not starting behind the stitch or in front of the stitch. I'm seeing where the stitch is and I'm going onto the blue fabric. I'm going to catch about like 1/8 of an inch of that blue fabric, and then when I'm going to come up, instead of coming up onto the blue, hopefully you're seeing this, instead of coming up onto the blue, you're going to at the last second give your needle a little bit of a twist, and you're going to catch the fold of the green, and then you're going to just pull that all the way through. So let's do that again. So we've come up onto the green, we're going to go down onto the blue, let your needle slide for about a small 1/4. I want to say 1/8, but it's a little bit bigger than 1/8, but it's also smaller than 1/4. And then you're going to catch the needle through the fold of the green. Make sure that you don't come up like too high into the green either, because if you do that, your stitch is going to be really large. So you want to make sure that you're just as close into that fold as you can, and then bring it through. And as you can see, the stitches are so small that you can't see the thread. You can see the little indents like from the tension of it where I've been pulling it kind of nice and tight, but you can't actually see the stitches. You can't see like large loops of thread going across. So it's called the blind stitch because you want it to be basically as invisible as possible and nice and neat, and that's the reason why I make such small stitches. Also, the smaller your stitches and the closer your stitches are together, the more stitches that will be in your binding, and therefore the stronger your binding will be. If your stitches are huge, like for example, if I put my needle down onto the blue here and I come up like way over there, like I know I'm not even on the green, but if I come up way over there, that's like from here to here, that's like 1/2 an inch. That's way, 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 way too big for a stitch, especially for little delicate hand binding on a baby quilt that's going to be played with and pulled on and dragged through dirt and all that good stuff. It's going to be well loved, okay? So you want the binding to be strong, because that's the most important part of the quilt, is the part that keeps it together, right? So anyway, you're going to go along doing that. You can pin it. Like I'm holding the fabric in place with this thumb because I'm right-handed, so I'm working the needle with my right hand and holding the binding in place with my left. But if that's way too much for you, you can use pins. You can use those fun little binding clips. I have some that I can show you. So while I was editing all of the clips for this video, I realized for some reason the section where I start talking about the binding clips gets cut off, so I just wanted to quickly talk about that. So the binding clips that you can get look like this, and they're just a little bit better than using pins when you're doing your hand binding, because if you're using pins and going along, you often like catch the pins on your clothes or on your hand when you're moving along. And also the binding clips are nice because they don't come off at all, whereas the pins would slide out if you were tucking this in your bag to take on the go to work on your binding and stuff. So these are just kind of convenient to use because they do a good job of holding on, and they won't catch on anything either. Like even if you were going to put this into a bag to take with you to do it like while you're on the train or anything like that, these won't be like stabbing the bag or ripping the bag, or like when you put your hand in to take it out, it won't be stabbing your hand and stuff. So these are nice little things to have, and I like that they won't come off at all, even if they get pulled on or pushed against and stuff. They're really super strong. But anyway, you're going to just keep going all the way around. When you do come to a corner, I'll just show you quickly. Again, based on how your miter went, it should work perfectly, that if you were coming along a side, just like this, you're going to have this folded, right? And then this part is going to have a little point at the top. So what you're going to do is fold that edge down so that, you know, you can start to prepare this side for when you come around the corner, and your edges in the corner here should make a little miter, a little 45. So if you're hand stitching, you're coming along here where my thumb is. Obviously I'm not holding this properly because you can see the stitches from before, but once you get to the corner, you can make a few stitches in the same place just to catch those folds together. I know some people that stitch right up to the corner. You don't have to do that. I usually just do 3 or 4 right at the base of the miter, and then I just turn the corner and I carry on the next side. So while I'm just mentioning that, make sure that when you bring this down, it covers up your seam, okay? Because you don't want your stitches from before to be hanging out like that. That's not cute. So yeah, if you have any questions on how to do it, you can definitely just send me an email at quilters.workshop@gmail.com. All of my other social media links are always listed down below, so you can see what I'm working on Instagram and Facebook and all that good stuff. So good luck with your hand binding, and I would love to see some pictures of anything that you've done. And if you want to see the tutorial for the quilt that I'm binding right now, it's the easiest and simplest and one of the cutest little quilt patterns that I've done. I will link that video down below as well. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day.